Welcome to your post-daily news show. I am John Pollock alongside Wai Ting on Tuesday, April the 26th. Hello, Wai. How are you doing? How do you feel?
I feel up. I'm well. We just recorded this month's edition of Ask Away, and here we are.
Yes. How long has it taken for you to be tired of talking to me since your
Come
return?
on. Listen, what are we, like 14 years going in now? I'm not tired at all.
We're near. I'm sure you're near the breaking point, but you are a trooper nonetheless. So yes, we have news to go through, and yes, as Wai mentioned, Ask Away will be dropping tonight for members of the Post Wrestling Cafe. So if you are part of the exclusive club, you will get our Q&A session, our monthly mailbag show, going through all of your questions. That's dropping tonight. No Up Next tonight on the site. Davey and Braden will be back together in person on Thursday. A Thursday edition of Up Next. It's Thursday Up Next Thursday in the spirit of Thursday Raw Thursday.
Thursday up next Thursday. It's also Thursday, BD Elite Thursday, because I believe they'll be covering both shows.
That's right. They will be covering both, so you can check that out on Thursday. We'll also be getting a new Bushby and Thompson's Wrestling Adventure, looking back at the Cruiserweight Classic of 2016 with commentary duo Mauro Ranallo and Bryan Danielson.
I know, quite the pairing that I don't know if we'll ever get again.
Yes, if you want Danielson and Zack Sabre Jr., well, in 2016, that was the closest you were going to get. In 2022, maybe we're a bit closer. But there you go. That's going to be coming out on Thursday. And a note for this week, Rewind to SmackDown, rather than being live Friday night, we will be dropping that show on Saturday afternoon. So look out for that Saturday if you are a Post Wrestling Cafe member. But let's get into the news. Very, very sad story off the top. And that is the passing of a luchador, Toro Bill Jr., who was wrestling on Monday night at Arena Puebla, which is the building that CMLL owns, and he had been kind of a staple on their Monday shows there. There is a write-up on his career by the Cubs fan over at Lucha Blog if you want to go check that out. But essentially, what happened was he was wrestling in the second match on the show, involved in a tag match, and the reports were that he went down on the canvas and was taken out on a stretcher. Later, the paper El Sol de Puebla was reporting that a defibrillator was seen, and his passing was announced after the show. His career goes back to 2005, and CMLL was largely his home promotion, but he was born in Puebla, and that was where, largely he wrestled. He wasn't like a main, he wasn't on all of like the big shows for CMLL, but his father was Toro Bill and trained him, and then Toro Bill Jr. was part of the Death Battalion team with Ray Apocalypsis. They were a team together from 2014 until 2017, and he was currently part of a group called Compadres del Diablo, and that was the team that was in action on Monday night. And afterwards, we just got this statement from CMLL that they posted that CMLL joins the sorrow that seizes the fighting family for the sensitive death of the fighter Toro Bill Jr., who had an outstanding career in the Puebla arena, and wishing him rest in peace. And we've seen there have been different ages listed for him, but apparently on his Facebook profile, it does list his birth date as May 29th, 1986, which, if that is the accurate birth date, 35 years of age. So this is a very tragic story involving his passing, and this certainly not to say it's completely uncommon that we've seen situations like this, but really, really tragic. And the age, regardless of what the exact age was, this was a young man.
I mean, being 38 myself, like to have to imagine somebody's life being taken away that early is absolutely tragic, and I guess we await details as to the exact reasons and cause behind it.
Yeah, I mean it's largely been speculated upon as a heart attack, but official cause of death I guess has not been officially reported yet. So we will see what the follow up is on that. But obviously our condolences to his family and those around him and those on that card. That had to be. I mean that's a traumatic incident whenever you're on a card and there's something like that coming out of it. We'll move on to a couple other notes. Going back to Monday on Raw, we got the return of Asuka and Mustafa Ali. Both back. Asuka had been out since last July. Ali had not been on television since October. And both coming in and both being inserted not just into the show, but into programs itself. It looks like Asuka and Becky Lynch is the direction, with Becky Lynch kind of going into this kind of crazed character now that she has lost her precious, the title, which to me leads to, like, this is an easy way for Asuka to get a notable win coming back and continues to spiral Becky out of control, thinking she's hit rock bottom, but could go even lower. And with Ali, he is going to be paired with Ciampa, just Ciampa, as Kevin Raphael, friend of the show from TVA Sports, alerted everybody prior to the show, but no more Tommaso.
Yeah. Both programs I'm excited by. Yeah, I mean, we kind of spoke about it yesterday, but Asuka, Becky Lynch feels fresh at this point because Becky Lynch feels so fresh, and they are in need of bigger names in the division right now. And Asuka has always been somebody out there who, from the moment I would say that she entered the main roster, I think you could really put into a title contenders match and generate a certain level of interest because in ring she is so good. I would say like the build itself doesn't even need to be all that great for me to be interested in the match because I think she's, one of their very top performers, men or women, in the company itself. So we'll see what the storytelling is like and we see what sort of angle they can create.
You brought it up on Monday night about Bayley, and obviously she's going to be the next one everyone is looking upon about her return. Where would you be fitting her in? She was at one point like this babyface breakout star, ended up going, not that direction, and ended up becoming, one of the highlights of the Thunderdome era. Do you bring her back in that heel role, or do you think that there's going to be such a momentum for her as a babyface? What would you see as the most strategic return for Bayley?
I was somebody who was definitely a detractor to turning Bayley initially because I thought she was such a great babyface and somebody so whose potential was so untapped as a babyface. But ever since she turned heel, she definitely changed my mind because she became one of the most compelling and entertaining heels, much in the same vein as a Sami Zayn had on Raw, through a similar transition. So either way, I think she's good. I'd love to see her retain many of the qualities she developed as a heel. But I'd be curious now at this point, like she's almost such a likable heel that you can go back around full circle and turn her into a babyface. But this babyface will be a very different version of Bayley from the one that we used to see with the floating heads. What do they call those? Crazy
floating
arm
heads. The Bayley buddy.
The Bayley buddies, that is correct, yeah. So I think I think she should come back in, maybe a bit more of a heel slant, but then very quickly somehow turn into a babyface and be injected into a program. I would say on Raw against Becky Lynch, potentially after this Asuka program, or maybe you go right to a title challenge with Bianca Belair, and from that point on, some way somehow, after a failed title challenge attempt, that's maybe when you go the babyface route with Bayley.
I think if you have all your ducks in a row, like both women's divisions between shows should have some compelling directions when you insert Bayley and Asuka coming back. That freshens things up. I think the Ronda Rousey trajectory is going to be very interesting over these next few months to see if they can get it back on track, because I think most will argue like this is petering out in terms of Ronda being your top babyface on SmackDown, but there may be reasons that they're going to be very committed to keeping her in that role. But you could very well have the situation way of SmackDown, like the audience turning on Ronda, and you've got Charlotte that should probably be a heel regardless. And then your babyface counterpart is Sasha Banks on that show. So there's different interesting pieces to mix and match between the women's division. But I would say, like, if you have some great ideas, you certainly have the performers that could make for two compelling divisions between both shows.
And over on the men's side with Ali versus Ciampa, I'm very excited for this program. It's one that I think I certainly wasn't expecting when we had Ciampa come in. Jury's still out on, how they treat him. He seems to be a bit of a project for them. And
Project Ciampa?
Project Ciampa, exactly. So, is Ali being brought in specifically to feed to Ciampa? Or is it a case of them wanting somehow both of them to, be elevated as a result of this? Seeing Ali come back on Monday, being given a win over The Miz, and by doing it in a way that put a lot of focus on his in-ring abilities gave me a lot of promise. This was not him coming in as a leader of Retribution, doing some sort of over-the-top gimmick. This feels somewhat authentic to, I think, the personality that he's been trying to convey through his Twitter. And that is a guy who loves professional wrestling and simply wants to go out there to perform. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And we know Ciampa is very much that type of person too. But we also know that Ciampa is way better as a heel, as good as he is as a babyface. He's way better as a heel. So I'm curious to see what the reason is for him to attack Ali, and I want to see more of that menacing Tommaso Ciampa on Raw.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Ali and Ciampa, and if this is a setup program for Ciampa, I mean, just given where like these directions have been, like I cannot see Ciampa just staying as, great wrestler, Tommaso Ciampa, or just Ciampa, I guess I should say, that some wacky occupation or character trait will be assigned to this guy, just because that seems to be such a focus of coming up and almost having that elevator pitch, like in one sentence, describe this character, and it's got to be grabbing everybody. And I mean, we will see. Ciampa, I'm certainly reserved to see where this guy is in 6 months, because he has a lot of factors going against him based on precedent of, main roster successes and failures from NXT. But, he's in a program. He's in there with Ali. Like, I'm not worried about the match quality. It's kind of where they will find themselves in the pecking order on Raw.
I think it's also important, when you have somebody like a Tommaso Ciampa who is coming in with definitely a larger than life personality. He's got a personality that transcends, I would say, maybe the stigma that might be attached to somebody of his particular size. I think it's really important. It's a really good pairing to put him against Ali. He's somebody of a similar size to him, and I think the ability to see Tommaso Ciampa as somebody who's not smaller than a Randy Orton or somebody like that is better. He's better protected, going up against somebody like Ali.
Let's go back to Friday night and SmackDown and Rampage numbers. So we had Rampage back in its usual time slot and a lot of NBA competition on Friday night. So not just ESPN dominated the night. They had the top 6 spots on the cable charts was NBA programming on ESPN, including games between Miami and Atlanta, which went against SmackDown, and the beginning of Rampage. And then the number 1 game of the night was Phoenix and New Orleans, which went against the last 40 minutes of Rampage. So you can see the numbers there, just astronomical figures for males 18 to 49 that we're talking about. That is going to eke out a bit on the Rampage side. But starting with SmackDown, they were airing on, we have a network-to-network comparison because ABC was airing the Milwaukee-Chicago game, and SmackDown did beat out all of the network programming, including the NBA game. But what was interesting is like their viewership and demo fell. They did a 1,952,000 viewers and a 0.47 in 18 to 49. These are their lowest numbers since July 2nd, back in the Thunderdome. So despite being a almost 10-month low for the company, they still managed to win the night among network programming, but not winning entirely because that belonged to ESPN. So, SmackDown was down, but at the same time, they were able to beat out everything else on the network competitive side on Friday. Rampage, on the other hand, did 518,000 viewers and a 0.19, finishing 14th, again, with a bevy of sports competition that we just went over. So their numbers were, they were up overall from last week, where they were outside of their time slot, airing earlier in the night. Down in viewership, but up in the demo, as I pull this up here. Or sorry, other way around. So they were, up in viewership, down in the demo. But looking back 2 weeks ago to their, same time slot, down 14% in viewership and down 24% in 18 to 49 from 2 weeks ago. So that's going to be the result of being hit here. But their viewership and demo, like they were above kind of that bottoming out period that we saw, which was pre-playoffs. And this was like a rather loaded lineup for Rampage. You had a title match that had been built up for a while with Jade and Marina Shafir. You had the Cole Ishii match, and even Daniel Garcia and Eddie Kingston was, a notable match for Rampage. The big reason that they were as high as they were in viewership was they saw a 40% jump in their 50-plus audience. So this was kind of a a bounce back in their 50 plus, which they always get hurt when they move earlier in the evening in that demo.
If you're AEW or WWE, would you be happy with these performances?
I think you have to be given the competition. I would say that I wouldn't be ecstatic about these numbers. Like, you're still down, but for SmackDown, I mean, if you're just comparing yourself with the other networks, you finished on top, so that's got to be a positive sign. And with Rampage, again, it was a lot that you were up against, and I would say at the very least, like, you were above. I think they're out of that bottoming out period where they were falling under 200,000 viewers in the demo. So they did 248, and that's with all of this sports competition on Friday. So again, I'm not throwing a birthday party, or it's not my birthday, so I wouldn't be throwing a party regardless over these numbers. But I think they held up at least well enough. More so for SmackDown, but Rampage, I think it's better than where the show had been trending, and we'll see if this continues. But I think Rampage this next while, like, you're seeing the reports that they could get all bounced around on TNT throughout the next while because of the playoffs. So I think this show, not to really take those numbers seriously, but also what momentum gets lost too if it bounces around in the schedule, and when they're back onto a regular Friday night at 10 slot, it could be a while. If it's 1 week you're at 10, another week you're moved earlier in the night, and that's how you lose viewers, is breaking those patterns beyond 1 week.
Yeah, it's always going to be tough. Like, do you feel like at some point we'll get a more consistent time for Rampage or
the summer? I think the summer is what you're kind of looking for. Is once the playoffs are over, you'll probably have like an uninterrupted schedule, and yeah, that's kind of when you'll have a baseline, because I think these next 2 months are going to be impacted based on the NBA schedule and what games land on a Friday or a Wednesday, for that matter, that are going to affect Dynamite, and they're going to affect WWE as well. And just one other note on SmackDown, I mentioned yesterday that they were up against not just 2 NBA games, 2 NHL games, and the big one was the Toronto Blue Jays, and they fell 28% in viewers, and they fell 61% in their 25 to 54 demo. So they just got annihilated against all of these sports games that were going on. They finished 10th among sports, so that's definitely on the low side for SmackDown. And Raw has been doing fantastic numbers throughout March and coming out of WrestleMania, but moving to OLN, I wonder if that's going to have, I imagine it's going to have an effect. The question is, how much of an effect are people going to just not see it on Sportsnet 360 and not search for OLN?
Right.
But I know, Wai, the numbers that you're most curious about coming out of this weekend, and those were the F1 numbers on ESPN. So on Saturday morning, the quali did 964,000 viewers at a 0.36. They were 6th for the entire day. The only thing that beat the qualifying was the NBA.
This is America or Canada?
This is on ESPN.
Oh, ESPN. Wow. Okay. So what does that rank them?
They were number 6th all day on Saturday. Wow. And then Sunday, the actual race itself did 1,003,000 viewers and a 0.39 on ESPN. Again, they were number 6 for the day and only beaten by the NBA and 90 Day Fiance. They beat out like Sunday Night Baseball. And this is at 9 in the morning. So I think this is really interesting to see like the numbers that they are pulling here. Like, this would be on a Sunday morning. This was ahead of Dynamite last week.
I did not realize, it was such a ratings winner, I suppose. But
this is all new to me. Like, these are not F1 numbers are not numbers I have studied in the past. But just looking at it, I mean,
it's hard to tell, I guess, because it's Sunday. But like, how would you say that maybe their demos compared to professional wrestling?
I mean, if you look at it, obviously they have not the older viewership that WWE has. You can see that, but it'd be interesting. I'll do like a comparison this week and look at both sides there. But it's like that's a very healthy number that you're pulling when you're even beating like Major League Baseball in prime time on ESPN itself. Like, you're comparing networks as well, so it's not even skewing it by looking at like a weaker station. It's ESPN to ESPN, and they look at that number of like men 18 to 49 that were watching this again on a Sunday morning at 9 in the morning.
Well, for me, the relevance, is when it comes to these people that are talking about potentially buying rights fees for these fringe sports. I mean, F1 and WWE, I would say, are in similar competition.
Yes, this is it's going to be very interesting, and it ties in with like the Netflix story last week, because today Warner Brothers Discovery did their earnings call, and of course so much of the focus is on them pulling the plug on CNN Plus, and their idea is that you have HBO Max and Discovery Plus, and eventually they want to merge those two, which would have a combined subscriber count of over 100 million. But David Zaslav, who is the head of the merged company, he has stated, like, we are not going to spend stupid money on content. And is that going to be sort of the reaction by other streaming giants coming out of this Netflix story of, it sounded like it was just spend this ridiculous amount of money with the belief that the subscribers will come and this will pay dividends down the road. And is there going to be sort of a kind of leaning off of the gas pedal when it comes to all of this spending? Like, Netflix is, I think the figure is like 18 billion they plan to spend for the rest of the year on content. And look what Peacock has spent, like just ridiculous amounts of money. And, when these WWE deals come up, I mean, is that same value going to be attached to streaming rights that have been, and they've just been growing and growing? But if you're looking at streaming as not a growth business beyond a certain level, are you going to be committing the amount that you had previously if you believe like the ceiling is a lot lower than we anticipated? Like this Netflix and story and the reaction to it will be key to all of these sports properties.
Do you know how the stock's doing as of now?
Netflix stock?
Yeah.
I don't compared to last week. Like, I imagine it's it was down 36% throughout the week. So
yeah,
there you go.
It's at the month trend. It's still
it's under 200. So it is. It's taken a drastic hit, and obviously the response of like how they plan to curtail this, the investment community has not responded yet.
Interesting. Okay, we'll be following.
And last bit of news here. We didn't talk about this on Monday, but I thought it'd be interesting to bring up is that Saturday was the big Tyson Fury fight with Dillian Whyte. They had, I believe, 94,000 people at Wembley Stadium in London. And afterwards, Tyson Fury, I mean, he was just shooting angles for the future. He brought Francis Ngannou into the ring, and they were very much hyping up the idea of doing a special rules fight down the road. And what's interesting is that with Francis Ngannou, he has a sunset clause on his contract, and in theory will be, even though he's the heavyweight champion, that he will be free of his UFC contract if he doesn't resign. He is injured right now. He's recovering from knee surgery. But this is a fight that it's like a lot of these challenges you kind of just scoff at because, you need the cooperation of the UFC. In this case, it's a fight that could happen. And the question would be if it's a boxing fight, if it's some kind of mixed rules fight, which I don't know why Tyson Fury to me holds all the leverage here. And for Ngannou, it's like you're stepping out of your world, but to make an incredible amount of money. But the point is, if he decides not to go back to the UFC, like what else is out there for Francis Ngannou? Like in MMA, the only place he is going to make the level of money that he wants is going to be UFC, or it's doing boxing, which I think you'll have the novelty of a Tyson Fury fight, but I don't think that's a career beyond one big spectacle fight. And I guess the interesting question will be if there's some kind of UFC involvement here, because Francis has stated he will not resign with UFC unless this fight is allowed by the promotion and whether they are on board for it or not. And then the other add-on to that is Tyson Fury was asked about WWE, and he brought up doing SummerSlam and mentioned the card in Cardiff, Wales, and name dropped Drew McIntyre, who those two have done kind of their Twitter angles in the past. So, the way it came off is that that's certainly in the cards, and he was very prepared when he was asked about WWE, of throwing out, the potential of being at SummerSlam and doing the Cardiff, Wales show.
Yeah, I mean, clearly a man who knows full well that, the world's attention is on him the most after one of these fights, and he came prepared with his shots, shooting his shot across multiple genres of combat sports. So, all the respect to him. And, for a show like, what the WWE is putting on, I don't see why you wouldn't contact somebody like a Tyson Fury for some
for
sort
that
of special
Cardiff
attraction.
show. I mean, to me,
perfect.
it's Yeah, like to me, it's you're essentially buying like a marketing campaign to have Tyson Fury attached to your big show, and what added attention you're going to get in that market with Tyson Fury attached. Are you aware of what his base salary was for the fight on Saturday? What his base purse was?
I have no idea.
$29.5 million.
Good for him.
So,
honestly, whatever. And you know what? Like somebody like Francis Ngannou, I think he completely realizes, hey, there may never be a point in my career, in my life, where I will have as much leverage as I do right now. Good for him for shooting his shot, and trying to take at least, like trying to force the UFC's hand when we know the vast majority of performers will never really get the opportunity to.
this is a rarity. Like most times, and I understand like this is somewhat changing with more of these like sunset clauses, but like the typical way was that if you're a champion, your contract just automatically rolls over. So you don't get situations like this where a champion has that kind of leverage and can leave. So with Francis Ngannou, like he negotiated a deal that did have favorable terms for him. And now you're staring at this and it's UFC, either they get on board with this or they risk, Francis going out and doing this fight where UFC is not cut in. And maybe Ngannou doesn't want UFC cut in to any of this. Like, it's interesting, but I don't say 100% this fight happens, but you cannot dismiss it. Like this one is one that actually does have some steam behind it, that there are logistics in play that, and they shot their angle here to essentially, like this was obviously a very strategic move by both parties to have Francis there and then do this afterwards for this audience to see this. And coming out of it, you're talking about this fight as a possibility.
It's a good, smart move for the man. It's so interesting, like in boxing, where like I think a lot of this stuff is a lot more transparent versus obviously professional wrestling, where every single thing is somewhat controlled, especially when it gets onto TV. But in boxing, and I guess more so MMA now a little bit as well, all these public moves of PR are taking place in front of us, and we kind of have to like try to dissect it afterwards, and it makes things just that much more interesting.
And the last thing on the agenda is NXT 2.0 tonight. And we have Tony D'Angelo taking on Zion Quinn, Nikita Lyons versus Lash Legend, Solo Sikoa versus Trick Williams, and then Legado del Fantasma's Joaquin Wilde, Elektra Lopez, and Cruz del Toro, I believe, the former Raul Mendoza, taking on Josh Briggs, Brooks Jensen, and Fallon Henley. And the debut of Nathan Frazier, the former Ben Carter from NXT UK, will also be on the show tonight.
Okay, yeah. Admittedly, I have not been all that caught up with NXT, so...
this is your catch-up tonight, Way. I mean, what a lineup.
I will dive back in, sure, yeah. What have been your thoughts recently?
The Braun Breaker, Joe Gacy stuff has been something else, and I don't know what that something else is. But they've got their special next week, so they're going to be promoting that tonight. Spring Breakin'.
Spring Breakin', yes.
Joey Gacy's Spring Breakin', as I'm dubbing it. That is next week. And yeah, I believe this is just streaming on Sportsnet Now in Canada tonight. So alert for our Canadian viewers out there.
We have a couple super chats to get to, John, before we get out of here. And the first one comes to us from Jamie Stoker, who sends £10. Thank you so much, Jamie, for the support. He says, I miss Rewind Away. I think he means I missed Ask Away. He says, my question, I hope it's okay here. Yes, it is. Do you think AEW will go back to the nostalgia feel with things like they did pre-COVID? It was nice in small chunks, especially rarely seen legends.
Like bringing back names from the past, like they did. I remember that one go-home show for one of the pay-per-views, and they brought out J.J. Dillon, and they did kind of like a Horseman deal, minus Ric Flair. Yeah, I don't see why. Like, if it makes sense, if there's a storyline reason, I think that's one of the positives in AEW is the fact that they do cameos like that every now and then, where someone can show up and be in. Like they did that with the Rock and Roll Express that one time, where they did the stuff with
tag
the
team
Bucks.
appreciation.
That's right,
deal.
the tag team appreciation night. Yeah, I always like ideas where you can do little things like that, especially if they're specific to the market, that they make sense and can have. I think sometimes that's underestimated about just bringing back somebody with some value, and your national audience will be interested in that.
I really like it. Obviously, like whenever they do something like that, speaking about like I think the special feelings when you're watching wrestling, it's something I didn't necessarily get watching like the opening segment of Raw yesterday with Randy Orton's 20th celebration, which I think could have felt maybe a lot more special than that opening segment did by bringing in various people. And anytime you have like something that feels real, like an appearance from a legend who has been on national TV in front of the spotlight for a long, long time, these are moments that are definitely like more memorable than something that is typically like scripted on a professional wrestling show. So I
Having
hope they
Greg
do more of it.
Valentine there for the dog collar match, just sitting in the crowd, like that was a
Yeah.
nice little touch for that match.
All that stuff is great. I do wonder if AEW, now that I mean they've always been really concerned with ratings, but I would say like they have everything down to that much more of a science these days. Being concerned with like every single second or minute of like the show. How much will we continue to see like a tag team appreciation thing, or like maybe a full show dedicated surrounding maybe legends that aren't necessarily as well known, or didn't come up through like a WWE era. I don't know. I wonder where the line is for like who they're willing to like devote TV time to and who they aren't.
Yeah, I mean, granted, like this next little while with the NBA might interrupt this, but we talk every week, and specific to Dynamite, like they're up 5% here, down this, like it's a pretty consistent line that we're getting for, both in terms of viewership and the demo. Like they're skewing, but you're essentially taking a step back and looking at the overall trend, and this is just like kind of week to week performance that I do think you have a pretty built-in audience that understands AEW Wednesday from 8 till 10. They know it's on TBS, and you're always going to get fluctuations. That's just reality. But I think there's a pretty consistent baseline that gives you a lot more leeway of things you can do. And I think different is always good, I think, by and large, unless it's stupid different.
Yes. Our next super chat comes to us from John Pine, who asks, who else is excited for GCW in Providence? Yes, of course, Mr. Pine from Providence himself, our GCW reviewer at postwrestling.com, going to his backyard. GCW is.
Yes,
Wow.
this is the Fete Music Hall, which this is where Maria Kanellis and Bobby Cruz are doing their show this weekend with the Women's Wrestling Army. So I guess they didn't book the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence for GCW.
That might be a bit more distant. I wonder what we'll get a full report about, what the Providence GCW fan base is exactly. But
Yeah.
they're doing a lot of shows. Do you think they'll ever come to Canada, John?
Yeah, they could. Yeah. How do you think they would do here in this market?
I think they do well. Yeah, like
What's doing well? Could they draw 1,000 people up here?
I'm going to say yes. I think so. I think, like maybe a basis of comparison is like, what was Ring of Honor doing for Ted Reeve, for instance? Like,
I think their peak there, they did 2,000 for the very first show at Ted Reeve Arena, which I think was Steen going for the title. But they typically did like 1,500 to 2,000 in that arena.
And I don't think GCW is as hot as maybe ROH, during some of those prime years, especially like when you're talking about like, when they started bringing New Japan stars over. I mean, a lot of it will depend on the card, but I do think we are a city that is starved for non-WWE professional wrestling. And even at this point, like I don't hear about too many independent wrestling shows that are being run in our area. So
yeah, there's only a handful that are going on. Like I know Greektown just did a show at the legendary Kerr Hall West on the campus of Ryerson University, a place that I used to walk through each day. Yeah, it's like Smash is not running at the moment. There's a few that are going on around the city, but it's definitely a step back from where it just felt like Toronto. Like there were shows going on almost every weekend with a multitude of companies. But I do believe, to your point, like AEW coming here for a pay-per-view will be a major deal. Like I'm very high on what they will draw their first time in the market, especially if it's a pay-per-view.
I have to imagine they're well aware of that, and they're just waiting for the right opportunity. I really hope it's a big show, and I hope for their sake. I mean, they capitalize on,
It should be a pay-per-view, and you do like a Rampage here on the Friday. I would say minimum.
Sorry, John Pye, we took your Providence question and turned it into a Toronto question because we are that obsessed with our hometowns.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's it. Thank you very much for your support, everybody.
So we are going to be back tonight. Ask Away, the mailbag show, dropping for postwrestlingcafe.com members. So get on board and you can hear all of our answers to your questions. So that is it. We will be back tonight and then tomorrow, same time, same place. Actually, I have a great Batman story to tell you at a later date way. But that is all.
Okay.
That's your tease. Post Daily News Show is now over. Good night.